What happens when a quiet transfer student's act of defiance against her tormentors becomes the catalyst that brings down an entire school's culture of cruelty? The answer will leave you speechless. This is the story of Madison Torres, a girl whose courage in the face of relentless bullying would spark a revolution that no one saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Lincoln Valley High cast harsh shadows across the crowded hallway as Madison Torres clutched her worn messenger bag against her chest, navigating through clusters of students who seemed to know exactly where they belonged. It was her third week at the school, and she still felt like an intruder in someone else's carefully orchestrated world. The October morning air carried the scent of overpriced coffee from the student-run café and the lingering aroma of industrial cleaning supplies that never quite masked the underlying smell of teenage anxiety and cafeteria food. Madison had transferred to Lincoln Valley from across the country after her father's military reassignment brought their family to this affluent suburb outside Denver. At 17, she'd already attended 4 different high schools, each move forcing her to rebuild her identity from scratch, while everyone around her maintained friendships that stretched back to elementary school. She'd learned to read the social dynamics quickly, identifying the invisible boundaries that separated the popular from the forgotten, the protected from the vulnerable. Lincoln Valley High prided itself on academic excellence and college preparation, boasting a 98% university acceptance rate in alumni who'd gone on to become senators, tech entrepreneurs, and best-selling authors. The school's pristine hallways were lined with trophy cases, showcasing decades of athletic championships and academic achievements. Every surface seemed to gleam with the kind of perfection that only came from substantial funding and careful maintenance. But beneath the polished exterior, Madison had quickly discovered, lurked the same social hierarchies that plagued every high school she'd attended. The difference here was the sophistication of the cruelty and the resources available to those who wielded it. Where other schools might have crude bathroom graffiti, Lincoln Valley had anonymous social media accounts with hundreds of followers dedicated to destroying reputations. Where other schools had playground shoving matches, Lincoln Valley had psychological warfare disguised as harmless pranks. Madison walked with purposeful steps toward her advanced chemistry class, her military upbringing evident in her posture despite her attempts to blend in. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her backpack was organized with the precision her father had drilled into her since childhood. She wore the required uniform skirt, white blouse, and navy blazer, though hers came from the discount uniform exchange, rather than the boutique where most students shopped. The fabric was slightly faded, the blazer's edges showing the wear of previous owners, but it was clean and properly pressed. The uniform policy at Lincoln Valley was supposedly designed to eliminate economic distinctions among students, but Madison had learned that even identical clothing couldn't hide the subtle markers of social status. The cut of the fabric, the crispness of the pleats, the quality of the shoes all served as silent indicators of family wealth and social position. Her second-hand uniform marked her as clearly as if she wore a sign advertising her family's middle-class military background. She'd made it halfway to her classroom when she heard the familiar sound of expensive sneakers approaching from behind. Her stomach tightened with practiced recognition of trouble brewing. Over the years, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when she was about to become the target of unwanted attention. Well, if it isn't the army brat," came the voice of Brittany Chen, Lincoln Valley's unofficial queen bee and daughter of the city's most prominent plastic surgeon. Brittany moved through the school with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered a problem that daddy's money couldn't solve. Her glossy black hair was styled in perfect waves that somehow never moved despite Colorado's unpredictable weather, and her uniform was tailored to fit like a designer dress rather than standard school attire. Madison kept walking, hoping to avoid confrontation, but Brittany's voice carried enough authority to stop several nearby students in their tracks. The hallway began to fill with the electric tension that preceded teenage drama. Phones appearing in hands as if summoned by some invisible signal. "I'm talking to you, transfer girl," Brittany continued, her voice honey-sweet but laced with venom. She was flanked by her usual entourage, Ashley Rodriguez, whose father owned 3 luxury car dealerships, and Samantha Blake, whose mother was a former Miss Colorado turned real estate mogul. Together, they formed a trinity of privilege and cruelty that had ruled Lincoln Valley's social scene since freshman year. Madison stopped and turned slowly, her face carefully neutral. 3 weeks of observation had taught her that Brittany thrived on emotional reactions, feeding off fear and humiliation like some sort of teenage vampire. The key to survival was maintaining composure, though Madison's military training had also taught her when composure wasn't enough. "My name is Madison," she said evenly, meeting Brittany's gaze without flinching. "And I need to get to class." Brittany's perfectly glossed lips curved into a predatory smile. "Oh, how cute. She thinks she can just walk away." She gestured to her friends, who immediately moved to block Madison's path. "See, the thing is, we have some concerns about your presentation." "My presentation?" Madison repeated, genuinely confused. "Your uniform," Ashley chimed in, her voice carrying the particular brand of cruelty that came from someone desperate to maintain their position in the hierarchy. "It's kind of embarrassing for the school, don't you think? I mean, we have a reputation to maintain." Madison glanced down at her outfit, searching for whatever imaginary flaw they'd identified. Her skirt was the regulation length, her blouse was properly tucked, and her blazer was clean despite its obvious second-hand origins. "There's nothing wrong with my uniform." "Oh, honey," Samantha said with mock sympathy. "There's everything wrong with it. The color's all faded, the cut is completely wrong, and don't even get me started on those shoes." She pointed at Madison's black loafers, which were well-maintained but clearly not from the same expensive boutique where the other girls shopped. A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the unmistakable scent of social blood in the water. Madison could see phones being raised, recording devices ready to capture whatever humiliation was about to unfold. She'd seen this dynamic play out before at other schools, but Lincoln Valley's version came with a level of sophistication that made it somehow more brutal. "Look," Madison said, her voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. "I'm just trying to get to class. I don't want any trouble." "But trouble seems to follow you wherever you go," Brittany said, taking a step closer. "I mean, 4 schools in 4 years? That's not normal. Makes a person wonder what you did to get kicked out of all those other places." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Madison felt the familiar burn of injustice in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced every time her family's military lifestyle was twisted into something shameful. "I didn't get kicked out of anywhere. My father's in the military. We move when he gets reassigned." "Sure you do," Ashley said with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Military brat, huh? That explains the charity case uniform and the attitude problem." "I don't have an attitude problem," Madison replied, though she could feel her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "I'm just trying to get an education." "Well, maybe we can help educate you about how things work around here," Brittany said, her smile growing wider and more dangerous. "See, Lincoln Valley has certain standards, certain expectations. And when someone shows up looking like they raided the Goodwill donation bin, it reflects poorly on all of us." The circle of spectators had grown larger, creating an amphitheater of teenage cruelty with Madison at its center. She could see some students looking uncomfortable with the display, but none willing to intervene. The social cost of opposing Brittany and her crew was too high for most people to risk. Madison's father had taught her that there were moments in life when backing down only invited more aggression, but he'd also taught her to choose her battles carefully. She was outnumbered, in unfamiliar territory, and dealing with opponents who had home field advantage and unlimited resources. But something in Brittany's tone, some particular brand of entitled cruelty, was triggering every defensive instinct Madison had developed over years of military moves and social displacement. "My uniform meets all the school requirements," she said firmly. "If you have a problem with it, take it up with the administration." "Oh, we don't need to involve administration," Samantha said with mock sweetness. "We can handle this ourselves." Consider it a friendly intervention. That's when Madison noticed Ashley pulling something from her designer purse. The flash of metal caught the fluorescent light, and Madison's blood ran cold as she realized what she was looking at. Scissors. Small, sharp fabric scissors that looked innocent enough but carried the potential for devastating humiliation. "What are you doing?" Madison asked. taking a step backward, only to find her retreat blocked by curious students who'd formed an impenetrable wall of bodies. "We're going to help you with a little wardrobe adjustment," Brittany said, her voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real consequences for her actions. "Consider it a makeover, Lincoln Valley style." "Don't you dare," Madison warned, but her voice was drowned out by the excited murmur of the crowd. Phones were everywhere now, capturing every angle of the unfolding drama. She could already imagine the social media posts, the viral videos, the endless replaying of her humiliation. "Relax," Ashley said, approaching with the scissors held casually but threateningly. "We're just going to trim off some of this excess fabric. Maybe shorten that skirt a bit, add some ventilation to that blazer, make it more fashionable." Madison's mind raced through her options. She could scream for help, but the nearest teacher was 3 hallways away, and the crowd of students would muffle any sound. She could try to run, but the circle had closed around her completely. She could surrender to the humiliation and hope it would end quickly, but every instinct told her that showing weakness now would only invite worse treatment later. "This is assault," she said loudly, hoping her words would be picked up by the recording phones. "And destruction of property. You can't just destroy someone's clothes." "Can't we?" Brittany asked with genuine curiosity, as if the concept of consequences was entirely foreign to her. "I mean, who's going to stop us? You? You're nobody here. You have no friends, no connections, no power. We could strip you naked in this hallway, and the worst that would happen is a stern talking to from the principal, who happens to golf with my father every weekend." The casual admission of power and privilege was breathtaking in its arrogance. Madison realized she was facing something more dangerous than simple teenage bullying. This was systematic intimidation, backed by real social and economic power, the kind that had been operating unchecked for years. "Please," she said, hating the word as it left her mouth but hoping to buy time while she figured out an escape plan. "Just leave me alone. I haven't done anything to any of you." "You exist," Samantha said simply. "That's enough. You walked into our school, our territory, and you thought you could just blend in with your sad little uniform and your tragic backstory. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But you stick out like a sore thumb, and we can't have that." Ashley was close enough now that Madison could smell her expensive perfume, a cloying floral scent that seemed to symbolize everything artificial about Lincoln Valley's social elite. The scissors gleamed in the harsh fluorescent light, and Madison could see the anticipation in Ashley's eyes, the hunger for the power that came from destroying someone else's dignity. "Hold her," Brittany commanded, and suddenly Madison felt hands grabbing her arms. 2 junior boys, desperate to gain favor with the popular crowd, had seized her from behind, pinning her arms while Ashley approached with the scissors. "Let go of me!" Madison shouted, struggling against their grip, but their hold was firm. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every moment of her helplessness. She could hear whispered commentary, students placing bets on how far the popular girls would go, discussing the scene like it was entertainment rather than cruelty. Ashley raised the scissors toward Madison's blazer, the metal catching the light like a promise of destruction. "Don't worry," she said with mock concern. "We'll make sure you're much more comfortable when we're done." Madison felt the cold touch of metal against the fabric of her sleeve and knew she was out of time. In that moment, facing the destruction of not just her uniform but her dignity, something inside her shifted. The careful restraint her father had taught her, the diplomatic caution her mother had modeled, the survival instincts honed through years of being the outsider, all crystallized into something harder and more dangerous. Her father hadn't just taught her about choosing battles carefully, he'd also taught her about fighting when flight wasn't an option. And Madison Torres, daughter of Master Sergeant Miguel Torres and Dr. Elena Torres, had learned far more than academic subjects during her years of military base schooling. The scissors made contact with her blazer, and Madison heard the distinctive sound of fabric beginning to tear. The crowd held its collective breath, anticipating the complete humiliation of the transfer student who dared to exist in their carefully ordered world. But they'd made a critical miscalculation about who they were dealing with. Madison Torres wasn't just another scholarship student or military brat or social outsider. She was the daughter of a combat veteran who'd taught her that sometimes the only way to stop a bully was to show them that their target could bite back harder than they'd ever imagined. As the scissors continued their destructive path through her blazer, Madison made a decision that would change everything. Not just for her, but for Lincoln Valley High School, for Brittany Chen and her crew of privileged tormentors, and for every other student who'd ever been made to feel small by those who confused wealth with worth. The fabric of her blazer gave way completely, hanging in tatters from her shoulders as Ashley stepped back to admire her handiwork. The crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps, nervous laughter, and excited commentary. Phones flashed as the moment was captured from every angle, destined for social media immortality. "There," Brittany said with satisfaction. "Much better. Now you look like what you really are." But as Madison stood there in her destroyed uniform, surrounded by a crowd of students who expected her to crumble, something unexpected happened. Instead of tears, instead of humiliation, instead of the broken spirit they'd anticipated, they saw something that made several of them take involuntary steps backward. They saw anger, pure, focused, dangerous anger that had been building for 3 weeks of subtle harassment, years of constant displacement, and a lifetime of watching bullies target those they perceived as weak. Madison Torres had reached her breaking point, and everyone in that hallway was about to learn what happened when a military kid decided that retreat was no longer an option. The torn blazer hung from her shoulders like battle damage, but Madison stood straighter than before, not smaller. Her green eyes, which had been carefully neutral for weeks, now blazed with an intensity that made Brittany's confident smirk begin to falter. "Feel better?" Madison asked quietly, her voice carrying an edge that cut through the crowd's excited chatter. "Got what you wanted?" "Actually," Ashley said, emboldened by the successful destruction of the blazer, "I think we're just getting started." She raised the scissors again, this time aiming for Madison's skirt. "Let's see what other improvements we can make." That's when Madison Torres stopped being the quiet transfer student and became something else entirely, something her tormentors weren't prepared for and couldn't control. Something that would turn their moment of triumph into their worst nightmare. The boys holding her arms felt her muscles tense, but they interpreted it as fear rather than preparation. Ashley moved closer with the scissors, drunk on power and audience approval. Brittany watched with the satisfaction of someone who'd never encountered real consequences for her actions. None of them realized they were about to face both. Madison's father had taught her that the element of surprise was often more valuable than superior numbers or equipment. Her mother, an emergency room physician, had taught her about human anatomy and the precise application of pressure to achieve specific results. Her years of moving from base to base had taught her that sometimes you had to fight for your place in the world. As Ashley reached for her skirt with the scissors, Madison decided it was time for Lincoln Valley High School to learn some lessons about underestimating the quiet ones. The hallway full of students, armed with their phones and their assumptions about power and privilege, were about to witness something none of them would ever forget. The destruction of Madison Torres' uniform was about to become the catalyst for the destruction of everything Brittany Chen and her crew had built their social empire upon. But first, Madison had to deal with the immediate problem of 2 boys restraining her and a girl with scissors who thought cutting fabric was the worst damage she could inflict. Madison Torres was about to teach them all how wrong they were. Madison's movement was swift and precise, a combination of muscle memory and calculated fury that caught everyone off guard. The boys holding her arms had expected a helpless victim, not someone who'd spent years learning self-defense from a father who understood that military families lived in a world where protection wasn't always guaranteed. Her right elbow drove backward into the solar plexus of the boy on her right, while her left foot found the instep of the one on her left with surgical precision. Both boys released her simultaneously, one doubled over and gasping, the other hopping backward in pain and surprise. The crowd's excited chatter died instantly, replaced by shocked silence as they processed what they just witnessed. Ashley, still holding the scissors and reaching for Madison's skirt, found herself face to face with someone who was no longer playing the role of victim. Madison's hand shot out and clamped around Ashley's wrist with enough force to make the girl cry out. The scissors clattered to the floor as Madison applied pressure to the exact spot her mother had shown her years ago, a technique used to safely disarm agitated patients in the emergency room. Ashley's face went white as her fingers involuntarily opened and she stumbled backward into Samantha. "You crazy psycho!" Ashley screamed, cradling her wrist. "She attacked us! Everyone saw it!" But the phones that had been recording now captured a different narrative than the one Ashley was trying to create. They showed Madison defending herself after being physically restrained and having her property destroyed. They showed her using minimal force to neutralize threats, rather than escalating to unnecessary violence. Most importantly, they showed Brittany Chen's face transitioning from smug satisfaction to genuine shock, as her carefully orchestrated humiliation backfired spectacularly. "Call security," Brittany demanded, her voice cracking slightly. "She assaulted Ashley. She can't just attack people." "Actually," came a calm voice from the back of the crowd, "she can defend herself when she's being held against her will and having her property destroyed." Everyone turned to see Marcus Williams, a senior who transferred to Lincoln Valley 2 years earlier from a public school in Detroit. As one of the few black students at the predominantly white institution, he'd learned to navigate its social dynamics carefully, but he'd also developed a keen eye for injustice. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his phone held high and obviously recording. "I got the whole thing," he announced. "From the moment you ordered those boys to grab her to when she defended herself. Pretty clear case of assault and battery if you ask me. Plus, destruction of property." "Nobody asked you," Samantha snapped, but her voice lacked its usual venom. The presence of someone actively documenting their actions had shifted the dynamic in ways they hadn't anticipated. "Maybe not," Marcus replied easily, "but I'm sure the police will be interested in this footage, and the school administration, and probably Channel 7 News, considering how much they love stories about bullying in elite schools." The crowd began to murmur nervously. What had started as entertainment was suddenly feeling like evidence of criminal behavior. Several students quietly slipped away, unwilling to be associated with what was clearly escalating beyond typical teenage drama. Madison stood in the center of the dissolving circle, her torn blazer hanging from her shoulders like a badge of honor rather than shame. Her breathing was controlled, her stance balanced, and her eyes fixed on Brittany with an intensity that made the other girl visibly uncomfortable. "This isn't over," Brittany said, trying to regain control of the situation. "You think you can just attack my friends and walk away? My father owns 3 businesses in this town. My mother sits on the school board. You have no idea what kind of trouble you just bought yourself." "No," Madison said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the now quiet hallway. "You have no idea what kind of trouble you just bought yourself. But you're about to find out." She bent down and picked up her scattered books, then retrieved the scissors Ashley had dropped. Instead of giving them back, she held them up for everyone to see. "Evidence," she said simply, then dropped them into her messenger bag. "You can't take those," Ashley protested, still cradling her wrist. "Those are mine." "Were yours," Madison corrected. "Now they're evidence of assault and destruction of property. I'm sure the police will want to examine them for fingerprints." The word police sent a visible shudder through Brittany's group. For all their bravado about connections and influence, they were still teenagers who'd never faced real legal consequences for their actions. The idea of actual criminal charges was apparently outside their experience. "You're bluffing," Brittany said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "You won't call the police. You're nobody here. You don't have any power." Madison smiled, and it was the first genuine smile anyone at Lincoln Valley had seen from her. It wasn't warm or friendly. It was the smile of someone who just realized they held all the cards. "You're right. I am nobody here, which means I have nothing to lose." She pulled out her phone and, with deliberate slowness, began dialing. "Let's see. 911 for emergency services, or should I call the non-emergency line? What do you think, Marcus? Is ongoing assault considered an emergency?" "Definitely emergency," Marcus replied, grinning. "Especially with video evidence of the perpetrators threatening the victim." "Wait," Samantha said quickly. "Don't do anything stupid. We can work this out." "Work what out?" Madison asked, finger hovering over the call button. "The part where you destroyed my property? The part where you had your friends physically restrain me? The part where you threatened to sexually humiliate me? In front of a crowd? Which part exactly are we working out?" The hallway had gone completely silent now. Even students who'd been walking to class had stopped to watch the drama unfold. Some were recording, others were whispering into phones, and a few were already texting furiously to spread word of what was happening. "Look," Brittany said, and for the first time her voice held something that might have been actual nervousness. "Maybe we got a little carried away. High school drama, you know? It doesn't have to be a big deal." "A little carried away?" Madison repeated. "You organized a group assault. You destroyed my property. You had me physically restrained while you cut my clothes with scissors. In what universe is that a little carried away?" Ashley stepped forward, apparently deciding to try a different approach. "We could replace your blazer. Get you a new one from the good store. Designer quality. Consider it an apology." "An apology would be you getting on your knees and begging my forgiveness in front of everyone here," Madison said flatly. "What you're offering is a bribe to avoid consequences." The suggestion of Brittany Chen's crew begging for anything was so foreign to the social order of Lincoln Valley that several students actually gasped. The idea of the school's social elite being brought that low was apparently unthinkable to most of them. "That's not happening," Brittany said quickly, her composure cracking further. "We're not begging anybody for anything." "Then I guess we're calling the police," Madison said, and actually began dialing. That's when things got desperate. "Stop!" Ashley lunged forward, trying to grab Madison's phone, but Madison had been expecting exactly that reaction. She sidestepped smoothly, letting Ashley's momentum carry her past, then stuck out her foot just enough to send the other girl stumbling into a bank of lockers with a resounding crash. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot, and Ashley slumped against the lockers, dazed and clearly embarrassed. Her perfect hair was mussed, her uniform was wrinkled, and a red mark was already forming on her forehead where she'd made contact with the metal. "Ashley!" Samantha rushed to help her friend, shooting venomous looks at Madison. "You can't keep attacking people." "I didn't attack her," Madison said calmly. "She attacked me. Again. I defended myself. Again. It's all on camera. Again." She gestured to the dozens of phones that had captured Ashley's failed assault attempt. Marcus was openly laughing now. "Man, y'all really don't learn, do ya? Every time you escalate, she handles you. Every time you try to intimidate her, she turns it around on you. Maybe it's time to try a different strategy." "Shut up!" Brittany snapped at him. "This is none of your business." "Actually, it became my business when you decided to commit crimes in front of me," Marcus replied. "I'm a witness now, which means if anything happens to Madison, or if anyone tries to retaliate against her, I've got evidence of motive and opportunity." Madison finished dialing and lifted the phone to her ear. The sound of it ringing was audible in the silent hallway, each ring like a countdown to consequences that Brittany's group had never faced before. 911. "What's your emergency?" "Yes, I'd like to report an assault at Lincoln Valley High School," Madison said clearly. "Multiple students physically restrained me while another destroyed my property with scissors. I have video evidence and multiple witnesses." The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. Several students immediately started walking away, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. Others pressed closer, unwilling to miss what was clearly a historic moment in Lincoln Valley's social hierarchy. "Please hold while I connect you to officers in your area," the operator said. Brittany's face had gone completely white. "Hang up," she said urgently. "Hang up right now, and we can forget this whole thing happened." Madison kept the phone to her ear while staring directly at Brittany. Can we really forget that you organized a group assault on another student? Can we forget that you destroyed my property while having me physically restrained? Can we forget that you threatened to sexually humiliate me in front of a crowd?" "It wasn't sexual," Ashley protested from her position against the lockers. "We were just cutting your clothes." "Right," Marcus said dryly. "Cutting a girl's clothes against her will while she's being held down. I'm sure that's exactly how the police will see it too." Quote, "The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. What had started as a routine exercise in social dominance had spiraled completely out of control. They were facing potential criminal charges, social media infamy, and the collapse of their carefully maintained reputations. "You don't understand," Samantha said desperately. "If this gets out, if it becomes a big deal, it affects all of us. College applications, scholarships, our whole futures." "Should have thought of that before you decided to cut up my clothes," Madison replied without sympathy. "Lincoln Valley High School? This is Officer Rodriguez with Metro Police. We're en route to your location. Can you tell me your exact whereabouts in the building?" Madison gave precise directions to their location, then listened to the officer's instructions. "They want everyone to stay exactly where we are until they arrive," she announced to the crowd. "No one leaves, no one moves." The hallway erupted in nervous conversation as students suddenly realized they were all potential witnesses in a criminal investigation. Some tried to edge away despite Madison's announcement, but Marcus and several other students who'd been recording formed a loose perimeter, making it clear that leaving wasn't really an option. "This is insane," Brittany muttered. "You're ruining everything over a stupid blazer." "I'm holding people accountable for assault and destruction of property," Madison corrected. "The fact that you think those are minor things says everything about why this needed to happen." Ashley had recovered enough to stand, though she was still leaning against the lockers. "My parents are going to kill me," she said miserably. "Your parents are going to find out that their daughter is a criminal," Madison said bluntly. "Along with everyone else's parents. Along with college admissions offices. Along with anyone who Googles your names for the rest of your lives." The implications were finally hitting them. In an age of social media and permanent digital records, their actions would follow them indefinitely. The casual cruelty that had seemed so entertaining minutes earlier now looked like the life-destroying mistake it actually was. "Please," Samantha said, and for the first time her voice held genuine desperation. "We're sorry. We're really, really sorry. Can't we work something out before the police get here?" "What did you have in mind?" Madison asked with genuine curiosity. "A few minutes ago you were threatening to strip me naked in this hallway. Now you want to negotiate." "We could transfer," Ashley said suddenly. "All three of us. We could transfer to different schools. You'd never have to see us again." Madison actually laughed. "You think this is about me not wanting to see you? This is about making sure you never do this to anyone else. Ever. Transferring doesn't solve that problem." "Then what do you want?" Brittany demanded, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "Money? We can pay you. Our families have money." "Now you're offering bribes to obstruct justice," Marcus observed cheerfully. "In front of witnesses. With cameras rolling. You really are committed to making this as bad as possible for yourselves, aren't you?" The sound of sirens in the distance silenced all conversation. The reality of police involvement was no longer theoretical. In a matter of minutes, Brittany Chen and her crew would be facing real consequences for their actions, probably for the first time in their privileged lives. "Last chance," Brittany said desperately. "Whatever you want, we can make it happen. But only if you call them off before they get here." Madison considered the offer for a moment, then shook her head. "You know what I want? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to learn that money and connections don't make you untouchable. Most importantly, I want everyone in this school to see that bullies can be stopped." The sirens were getting closer. Students who'd been trying to leave found their paths blocked by other students who were recording everything. The hallway had become a trapped ecosystem of teenage social dynamics, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. "They're here," someone whispered as the siren stopped, presumably in the school parking lot. Brittany made one last desperate attempt. "You have no idea what you're starting," she hissed at Madison. "My family has influence in this town. We can make your life hell." "More hell than being physically assaulted and having my clothes cut off?" Madison asked. "More hell than being humiliated in front of a crowd? More hell than being threatened with sexual assault?" She paused thoughtfully. "Actually, bring it on. I'd love to see how much deeper you can dig this hole." The sound of authoritative footsteps echoed from the main hallway. accompanied by the static of police radios. Every student in the corridor froze as the reality of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. "This is where you learn that the real world doesn't care about your daddy's money," Madison said quietly to Brittany. "This is where you find out what accountability actually feels like." Two uniformed police officers rounded the corner, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. The crowd of students, the phones recording everything, the torn blazer hanging from Madison's shoulders, and the three girls who looked like they were attending their own execution. "I'm Officer Rodriguez," the older of the two announced. "We received a report of assault." "Who made the call?" Madison raised her hand. "I did. My name is Madison Torres, and I'm the victim." Officer Rodriguez nodded and pulled out a notebook. "Can you point out the individuals you're accusing?" Madison pointed to Brittany, Ashley, and Samantha. "Those three organized and carried out the assault. They also had two male students physically restrain me, but I don't know their names." "Jason Miller," Marcus called out helpfully, "and Kevin Park. They left about 5 minutes ago." Officer Rodriguez made notes while his partner, Officer Chen, began establishing a perimeter and asking students to put away their phones. The efficient, professional manner in which they took control of the situation made it clear this wasn't their first school-related incident. "Miss Torres, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Officer Rodriguez asked. Madison began recounting the events, her voice clear and factual. She described the harassment, the physical restraint, the destruction of her property, and her acts of self-defense. As she spoke, several students volunteered to provide their own accounts and video evidence. Meanwhile, Brittany, Ashley, and Samantha stood in shocked silence as the full weight of their situation became clear. They were no longer dealing with school disciplinary procedures that their parents could influence. They were facing criminal charges that would create permanent records and potentially affect their entire futures. "These are some serious allegations," Officer Rodriguez said when Madison finished her account. "Assault, battery, destruction of property, conspiracy. If the evidence supports these claims, all involved parties could be facing significant charges." "It was just a prank," Ashley said weakly. "We were just messing around." "Cutting someone's clothes off while they're being physically restrained isn't a prank," Officer Chen said matter-of-factly. "That's assault with sexual overtones. In some circumstances, it could be prosecuted as sexual assault." The color drained from Ashley's face as the implications hit her. What she'd thought was harmless fun was being described in terms that could destroy her life. "We want to see the video evidence," Officer Rodriguez announced. "Anyone who recorded any part of these events, please come forward." A dozen students stepped forward with their phones, eager to be helpful now that authority figures were involved. Marcus was first in line, his footage clearly showing the entire sequence of events from beginning to end. As the officers reviewed the videos, their expressions grew increasingly serious. What they were seeing wasn't ambiguous teenage drama. It was clear-cut criminal behavior with multiple witnesses and extensive documentation. "Based on the evidence we've reviewed," Officer Rodriguez announced, "we're placing Brittany Chen, Ashley Rodriguez, and Samantha Blake under arrest for assault, battery, and destruction of property." The words hit the hallway like a physical blow. Students gasped, several started crying, and others immediately began texting furiously to spread the news. The arrest of 3 of Lincoln Valley's most prominent students was unprecedented in the school's history. "You can't arrest us!" Brittany protested as Officer Chen approached with handcuffs. "We're minors. We're honor students. Our parents will sue you." "Your parents can hire all the lawyers they want," Officer Chen replied calmly, "but they can't change the fact that you committed crimes in front of dozens of witnesses with video evidence." As the handcuffs clicked around Brittany's wrists, the sounds seemed to echo through the hallway like a death knell for the old social order. The girl who'd ruled Lincoln Valley through fear and intimidation was being led away in custody, her carefully constructed image of untouchable privilege shattered beyond repair. Ashley and Samantha were similarly cuffed and processed, both crying now as the reality of their situation sank in. The phones that had captured their moment of triumph were now documenting their ultimate humiliation. "This is all your fault," Samantha sobbed at Madison as she was led past. "You could have just taken it like everyone else." "Everyone else shouldn't have had to take it," Madison replied firmly. "And now they won't have to." As the 3 former queens of Lincoln Valley were escorted out of the building, Madison stood in the hallway surrounded by students who were looking at her with something that hadn't been there before: respect. Not the fearful deference that Brittany's crew had commanded, but genuine respect for someone who'd stood up to injustice and won. The torn blazer still hung from her shoulders, but it no longer looked like a symbol of humiliation. It looked like a battle flag, proof that sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous when pushed too far. Marcus approached with a wide grin. "So how does it feel to single-handedly destroy the social hierarchy of an entire school?" Madison considered the question seriously. Around them, students were processing what they'd witnessed, many seeming to realize that the power structure they'd accepted as permanent was actually quite fragile when challenged by someone who refused to be intimidated. "It feels like the beginning," Madison said finally, "not the end." She was right. The arrest of Brittany Chen and her crew was just the opening move in a larger game that would ultimately transform Lincoln Valley High School completely. But first, Madison had to deal with the immediate aftermath of becoming the most famous student in school history, and all the complications that came with it. The silence that followed the police cars disappearing from Lincoln Valley's parking lot was unlike anything the school had ever experienced. Students stood in clusters throughout the hallways, speaking in hushed whispers, as if raising their voices might somehow invite more consequences upon themselves. The administrative offices buzzed with activity as Principal Davidson and his staff attempted damage control while fielding phone calls from frantic parents, local media outlets, and the school district's central office. Madison sat in the main office, her torn blazer finally replaced with a spare from the nurse's office, waiting to give her full statement to Detective Williams, who'd arrived shortly after the initial arrests. Through the office windows, she could see news vans pulling into the parking lot, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like technological flowers seeking signal instead of sunlight. "Miss Torres," Detective Williams said, settling into the chair across from her with a thick folder and a tablet computer. "I've reviewed the initial reports and video evidence. What I'd like to do now is get a comprehensive statement covering not just today's incident, but any prior interactions you've had with the 3 arrested students." Madison nodded, having expected this request. Over the next hour, she methodically recounted 3 weeks of escalating harassment, beginning with seemingly innocent comments about her uniform and background, progressing through social media campaigns designed to isolate her, and culminating in the morning's assault. Detective Williams took detailed notes, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting that Madison repeat specific details. "Have you reported any of these prior incidents to school administration?" the detective asked. "No," Madison admitted. "I was advised by other students that reporting problems with those 3 particular individuals rarely resulted in meaningful consequences. Their families have significant influence in this community." Detective Williams looked up from her notes. "That influence won't protect them from criminal charges. What happened today crossed several legal lines, regardless of their family connections." Quote. As they concluded the interview, Principal Davidson knocked on the door and entered with obvious reluctance. His normally pristine appearance showed signs of stress, his tie loosened, and his hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. "Miss Torres," he began carefully, "I want you to know that the school takes this incident very seriously. We'll be conducting our own investigation parallel to the police inquiry. Will this investigation include reviewing why 3 weeks of harassment went unaddressed by your staff?" Madison asked politely. Principal Davidson's jaw tightened slightly. "We can only act on incidents that are reported to us through proper channels. And yet multiple students have told me that reporting issues with those 3 students typically results in nothing happening," Madison replied. "That suggests either your reporting channels aren't working or your response procedures aren't effective." Detective Williams watched this exchange with interest, making additional notes in her folder. The dynamic between student and administrator was revealing information about systemic issues that went far beyond the morning's assault. "We'll be reviewing all our policies and procedures," Principal Davidson said stiffly. "In the meantime, I want to assure you that the school is committed to providing a safe learning environment for all students." "I appreciate that," Madison said. "I assume you'll be making similar commitments to the other students who've been victimized by this group over the years?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Principal Davidson's discomfort was evident, as he realized that Madison Torres wasn't going to quietly fade into the background now that the immediate crisis had passed. After completing her police interview, Madison returned to her classes to find that news of the arrests had spread throughout the school with the speed and efficiency of social media. Her classmates treated her with a mixture of awe, curiosity, and nervous respect, as if she were an exotic creature that might be fascinating to observe but potentially dangerous to approach. During lunch period, she sat alone in the cafeteria until Marcus Williams approached with his tray, followed by several other students she recognized but had never spoken to directly. "Mind if we join you?" Marcus asked. "Seems like you could use some company." Madison nodded toward the empty chairs around her table. "I'm not sure association with me is going to be good for anyone's social standing." "Maybe not," said David Kim, settling into a chair across from her. "But neither is letting bullies run the school unchallenged." As more students gathered around the table, Madison found herself at the center of conversations she never could have imagined. Students shared their own experiences with Brittany's group, some describing years of intimidation that had forced them to change their behavior, their friend groups, even their academic choices to avoid confrontation. "They made freshman year hell for me," admitted Jessica Walsh, a sophomore who'd been almost invisible until that moment. "Brittany decided I was too fat for the volleyball team, so she started a whole campaign about how I shouldn't even try out. Posted pictures of me eating lunch with comments about portion control. I ended up eating in the bathroom for half the year. They convinced the drama teacher not to cast me in the spring play," added Anthony Chen, no relation to Ashley, despite the shared surname. "Told him I was difficult to work with and had, quote, attitude problems. The teacher never even gave me a chance to audition." Story after story emerged, painting a picture of systematic intimidation that had shaped the entire social ecosystem of Lincoln Valley High School. Students had modified their behavior, suppressed their ambitions, and accepted diminished lives simply to avoid becoming targets of three teenagers who'd wielded social power like a weapon. "The crazy thing is," Marcus observed, "everyone knew it was happening. Teachers, administrators, other students. But somehow we all just accepted it as normal." "Not anymore," Madison said quietly. Today changed everything. She was more right than she knew. By the end of the school day, #LincolnValleyJustice was trending on social media platforms, with the video of Brittany's arrest being shared thousands of times. Local news stations had picked up the story, framing it as an example of bullying consequences in affluent schools. National media outlets were beginning to show interest, seeing parallels to broader conversations about privilege, accountability, and school safety. Madison's mother picked her up after school, having left work early once news of the incident reached her. Dr. Elena Torres sat in the parking lot for a moment after Madison got in the car, studying her daughter's face with the practiced eye of someone trained to assess trauma. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. "I'm okay," Madison replied, then reconsidered. "Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm relieved." "Relieved?" "For the first time since we moved here, I feel like I belong somewhere. Not because anyone gave me permission, but because I claimed my place and defended it." Dr. Torres nodded slowly. "Your father called. He's proud of you. Concerned about potential retaliation, but proud." "What kind of retaliation?" "The kind that comes when powerful families feel their children have been unfairly targeted. We need to be prepared for pushback, sweetheart. Legal challenges, social pressure, attempts to paint you as the aggressor. Wealth and influence don't disappear just because criminal charges are filed." Her mother's warning proved prescient. By evening, Madison's family received their first taste of what they were up against. The doorbell rang during dinner, revealing a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Dr. Torres, my name is Jonathan Mitchell from Mitchell Hayes & Associates. I represent the Chen family. I'd like to discuss the unfortunate incident involving your daughter and my client." Dr. Torres listened politely as the lawyer explained that his clients were willing to pay for Madison's damaged uniform, cover any counseling costs she might need, and even provide a generous settlement if the Torres family would consider asking the district attorney to reduce or drop the charges against Ashley Chen. "What you're describing sounds like attempted bribery," Dr. Torres said calmly. "Are you really suggesting that my daughter should accept money in exchange for allowing your client to avoid consequences for assault?" The lawyer's smile never wavered. "I'm suggesting that sometimes restorative justice serves everyone's interests better than punitive measures. Young Miss Chen has learned her lesson and will never repeat this behavior. If she's learned her lesson, then she'll accept whatever consequences the legal system imposes," Madison said from the kitchen doorway. "Justice isn't for sale." After the lawyer left, The Torres family sat around their kitchen table discussing what they could expect in the coming weeks. More lawyers would certainly follow, along with private investigators, social media campaigns designed to discredit Madison, and pressure from various corners of the community. "We need to document everything," Dr. Torres said. "Every contact, every threat, every attempt to intimidate us. If they want to play hardball, we'll play by the rules and let the system work." The next morning brought a new dynamic at Lincoln Valley High School. Madison arrived to find protesters gathered outside the building, though their message was confusing and contradictory. Some carried signs supporting her stand against bullying, while others demanded justice for the falsely accused students who'd been arrested. Inside the school, the hallways buzzed with a different kind of energy. Students who'd never spoken before were having animated conversations about power, justice, and the courage to stand up for principles. Teachers were being forced to address topics they'd previously avoided, as students demanded to know why systematic harassment had been allowed to continue unchecked. Madison's first class was advanced chemistry, where she discovered that her assigned lab partner was Kevin Park, one of the boys who'd helped restrain her during the assault. Kevin looked miserable as she approached their shared workspace, clearly wishing he could disappear entirely. "I know you probably hate me," he said quietly as they set up their equipment. "I know I screwed up really badly." Madison studied his face, noting the genuine distress in his expression. "Why did you do it?" Kevin was quiet for a long moment, focusing intently on arranging beakers rather than meeting her eyes. "Because they told me to. Because I was scared of what would happen if I said no. Because I'm a coward. And now? Now I'm facing expulsion and criminal charges. My parents are furious, and I have to live with knowing I helped hurt someone who never did anything to me." He finally looked up at her. "I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry." Madison considered his words carefully. The easy thing would be to reject his apology, to maintain her anger and moral superiority. But she recognized something in Kevin's demeanor that reminded her of her own feelings during the weeks before the assault. The trapped desperation of someone caught in a system they couldn't control. "Apology accepted," she said finally. "But you need to understand that sorry isn't enough. You have to do better. Not just with me, but with everyone. Every time you see someone being targeted, every time you see injustice happening, you have a choice. You can be a bystander, or you can be an ally." Kevin nodded eagerly. "I will. I want to. But I don't know how to start." "Start by telling the truth. About everything. Not just what happened yesterday, but about all the other times you've seen them target people and stayed silent." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Patterson calling for attention, but Madison noticed that several other students had been listening. Word of Kevin's apology and Madison's response would spread throughout the school, adding another layer to the evolving narrative about accountability and redemption. During lunch, Madison found herself once again surrounded by students eager to share their stories and seek her advice about their own situations. The cafeteria had become an informal forum for discussions about justice, courage, and institutional change. "The thing I don't understand," said Maria Santos, a junior who'd been documenting the social dynamics at Lincoln Valley for the school newspaper, "is why the administration never acted on any of this before. Everyone knew what was happening." "Because challenging powerful families is risky," Marcus replied. "Easier to maintain the status quo and hope problems resolve themselves." "Well, they can't ignore it anymore," David observed. "Not with criminal charges pending and media attention focused on the school." As if summoned by their conversation, Principal Davidson's voice crackled over the intercom system. "All students report to your advisory classrooms for a special assembly regarding recent events." The special assembly turned out to be an attempt by the administration to control the narrative and minimize damage to the school's reputation. Principal Davidson spoke about isolated incidents, misunderstandings, and the importance of following proper reporting procedures. His words rang hollow to students who'd witnessed systematic harassment being ignored for years. When he opened the floor for questions, hands shot up throughout the auditorium. Students who'd previously been silent found their voices, demanding explanations for years of inaction and promises of genuine change rather than empty rhetoric. Mr. Davidson called out Sarah Jenkins, a senior who'd never spoken at a public forum before. What's the point of reporting harassment to administration if nothing happens when the harassers have influential parents? Our investigation procedures are thorough and fair, Principal Davidson replied carefully. All reports are taken seriously. Then why? Madison stood up in her seat, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Did multiple students tell me that reporting problems with those 3 individuals was pointless because their families had too much influence? The auditorium fell silent as all eyes turned toward Madison. This was her first public appearance since the arrests, and students were curious to see how she'd handle being in the spotlight. "Miss Torres," Principal Davidson said stiffly, "I'm not sure where you received that information, but it doesn't reflect our actual policies." "It reflects your actual practice," Madison replied firmly. "Policies don't matter if they're not consistently enforced." Students learned not to report harassment because they learned that reports were ignored when the perpetrators had the right last names. A murmur of agreement rippled through the auditorium. Students were nodding, whispering to each other, and pulling out phones to record the exchange. "Furthermore," Madison continued, warming to her topic, "yesterday's assault didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of weeks of escalating harassment that multiple people witnessed, but no one in authority addressed. If the system had worked the way it's supposed to work, it never would have gotten to that point." Principal Davidson's face was flushed as he realized he was losing control of the narrative. "Miss Torres, this isn't the appropriate forum for—" "This is exactly the appropriate forum," Madison interrupted. "You called this assembly to address recent events." "Well, the recent events include years of systematic failure by this administration to protect students from harassment and assault." The auditorium erupted in applause, with students rising to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. When the noise died down, Madison was still standing, her chin raised defiantly as she stared down the principal. "What do you propose we do differently?" Principal Davidson asked, apparently realizing that dismissing her concerns would only make things worse. "Full investigation of all harassment complaints that were filed and ignored," Madison said immediately. "Public reporting of policy changes and enforcement mechanisms. Anonymous reporting systems that bypass administrators who might be compromised by family relationships or donor influence. And most importantly, acknowledgement that this problem exists and commitment to fixing it rather than denying it." The list of demands was met with another round of applause, and Madison noticed students throughout the auditorium taking notes or recording her words. She'd become more than just the victim of an assault. She'd become the voice of systemic change. After the assembly, Madison was approached by reporters who'd been allowed into the school to cover the story. Local news had become regional news, which was rapidly becoming national news as the story touched on broader themes of privilege, accountability, and institutional failure. "Miss Torres," asked Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News, "do you see yourself as leading a movement for change in schools?" Madison considered the question carefully. "I see myself as someone who refused to accept injustice. If that inspires other people to do the same, then maybe real change is possible. What message do you have for other students facing similar situations? Document everything. Find allies. Use the system when it works, but don't be silent when it fails. And remember that bullies rely on your silence and isolation. When you speak up and stand together, their power disappears." The interview would be broadcast that evening, spreading Madison's message far beyond Lincoln Valley. By the next morning, she'd received dozens of messages from students across the country, sharing their own stories and asking for advice about confronting injustice in their own schools. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Torres received a phone call at work from Detective Williams, who'd been investigating the background of the assault case. "Dr. Torres, I wanted to inform you that our investigation has uncovered evidence of additional incidents involving the 3 arrested students. We're expanding our inquiry to include potential charges related to cyberbullying, harassment, and conspiracy." "What kind of additional incidents?" "Multiple victims have come forward since yesterday's arrests. It appears your daughter's case was part of a much larger pattern of systematic intimidation. Some of these victims are reporting incidents going back several years. The implications were staggering." What had started as a single assault case was evolving into a comprehensive investigation of institutional bullying, with potentially dozens of victims and years of documented abuse. Madison learned about the expanded investigation when she arrived home from school that afternoon to find her mother waiting with a serious expression and a folder full of legal documents. "Sweetheart, you need to understand what's happening," Dr. Torres said gently. "This case is much bigger than what happened to you yesterday. You've opened a door that's revealed years of systematic abuse." As Madison read through the police reports and victim statements, she felt a complex mixture of vindication and responsibility. Her decision to fight back had given other victims the courage to come forward, but it had also thrust her into the center of a legal and social firestorm that would affect dozens of lives. "Are you ready for this?" her mother asked. "Because there's no going back now. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for everyone who was too scared to fight before." Madison looked up from the documents, her green eyes blazing with the same intensity that had faced down Brittany Chen in that hallway. "I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it until yesterday." Outside their suburban home, news vans were beginning to gather as word of the expanded investigation leaked to the media. Madison Torres, the quiet transfer student who just wanted to attend school in peace, was about to become the face of a movement that would challenge how educational institutions handled power, privilege, and accountability. The real battle was just beginning. 6 months after the arrests that shook Lincoln Valley High School, Madison Torres stood at the podium in the district courthouse, addressing Judge Catherine Walsh during the sentencing hearing for Brittany Chen, Ashley Rodriguez, and Samantha Blake. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, students, parents, and community members who'd followed the case as it evolved from a simple assault charge into a comprehensive investigation of institutional bullying. The 3 defendants sat at the defense table with their high-powered legal teams, looking nothing like the confident social rulers they'd once been. Months of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and social ostracism had transformed them into subdued shadows of their former selves. Their expensive clothes and perfect hair couldn't hide the weight of consequences they'd never imagined facing. "Your Honor," Madison began, her voice clear and steady, "when I was assaulted in that hallway, I thought I was just defending myself from 3 bullies. I had no idea I was exposing a system of intimidation that had terrorized students for years." During the investigation that followed Madison's assault, 17 additional victims had come forward with documented evidence of harassment, cyberbullying, and psychological abuse spanning back to middle school. The pattern was consistent and damaging. Identify vulnerable targets, escalate intimidation until they broke or left, then move on to new victims while maintaining their social status through fear. The evidence presented during this trial has shown that these defendants didn't just hurt me, Madison continued. They systematically destroyed the confidence, academic prospects, and mental health of dozens of students over several years. They created an environment where being different, being vulnerable, or simply existing without their approval was treated as a crime. Judge Walsh listened intently as Madison described the broader impact of the defendants' actions. 2 students had attempted suicide after prolonged campaigns of harassment. 3 had been forced to transfer schools when the psychological pressure became unbearable. 7 had changed their academic and career plans to avoid continued targeting. But this case has also shown that change is possible, Madison said, her tone shifting from somber to hopeful. When institutions are forced to confront their failures, when communities decide that protecting bullies isn't acceptable, when victims find the courage to speak truth to power, real transformation can happen. The transformation at Lincoln Valley had been comprehensive and sometimes painful. Principal Davidson had resigned under pressure after the investigation revealed that his administration had systematically ignored complaints against students from influential families. 3 teachers had been disciplined for failing to report harassment they'd witnessed. The school board had implemented new policies requiring independent investigation of all bullying complaints. Most significantly, the student culture had shifted dramatically. The social hierarchy that had protected abusers and silenced victims had collapsed, replaced by something more complex and equitable. Students who'd been voiceless for years found platforms to share their experiences and advocate for change. Bystanders learned that silence in the face of injustice made them complicit in the harm. "I want to address the defendants directly," Madison said, turning to face Brittany, Ashley, and Samantha. You had everything: wealth, privilege, opportunity, social status. You could have used those advantages to build people up, to create positive change, to make your school and community better. Instead, you used them as weapons to tear people down. Brittany's lawyer had argued for leniency based on her client's youth, academic achievements, and lack of prior criminal record. Ashley's family had presented character witnesses and evidence of her volunteer work. Samantha's defense team had emphasized her struggles with anxiety and peer pressure as mitigating factors. Your attorneys have asked for mercy, Madison continued. They've talked about your bright futures, your potential contributions to society, your capacity for growth and change. But what about the bright futures you destroyed? What about the potential you stole from your victims? What about the students who lost their confidence, their academic opportunities, their sense of safety because you decided their suffering was entertaining? The impact statements from other victims had been devastating. Former Lincoln Valley students described years of therapy, changed life plans, and ongoing struggles with trust and self-worth. Parents testified about watching their children's personalities change under the weight of constant harassment. Teachers admitted to feeling helpless as they watched vulnerable students being systematically destroyed. However, Madison said, her voice softening slightly, I also believe in redemption. I believe people can change, can learn from their mistakes, can become better than they were. But redemption requires more than apologies and community service. It requires genuine understanding of the harm caused and sustained effort to make amends. Judge Walsh had already heard arguments from both prosecution and defense. The district attorney had requested significant jail time and restitution, arguing that the defendant's actions constituted a conspiracy to deprive other students of their civil rights to education and safety. Defense attorneys had asked for probation, community service, and counseling, emphasizing their clients' young ages and potential for rehabilitation. If the court decides to show mercy, Madison concluded, I ask that any sentence include requirements for the defendants to participate in anti-bullying education, to speak publicly about the harm they caused, and to contribute meaningfully to programs that support victims of harassment. Real redemption means using your experience to prevent others from causing the same harm. As Madison returned to her seat, the courtroom remained silent, except for the soft sounds of people shifting in their chairs and the scratching of reporters' pens. Her victim impact statement had been powerful not just for its eloquence, but for its combination of righteous anger and measured hope. Judge Walsh called for a brief recess before announcing her sentencing decision. During the break, Madison found herself surrounded by supporters, including many of the students whose courage to come forward had made the comprehensive investigation possible. Marcus Williams, now student body president at Lincoln Valley, shook her hand warmly. Whatever happens next, you've already changed everything that mattered. We all did, Madison corrected. This was never about just one person standing up to bullies. It was about an entire community deciding that protecting abusers wasn't acceptable anymore. When court reconvened, Judge Walsh delivered a sentencing decision that satisfied neither the prosecution's desire for maximum punishment nor the defense's hope for minimal consequences. Brittany, Ashley, and Samantha each received 18 months in juvenile detention, followed by 2 years of supervised probation, community service focused on anti-bullying education, and restitution payments to their victims. The defendants will also be required to participate in restorative justice programs, Judge Walsh announced, including supervised meetings with willing victims to discuss the impact of their actions and the steps necessary for meaningful amends. The sentences were significant enough to send a message about consequences while leaving room for rehabilitation and growth. More importantly, the extensive media coverage ensured that the case would serve as a precedent for how institutions and legal systems could address systematic bullying. Outside the courthouse, Madison faced a crowd of reporters and supporters. The shy transfer student who just wanted to attend school in peace had become an articulate advocate for institutional change and victim rights. Ms. Torres, how do you feel about the sentences? Asked a reporter from the Denver Post. Justice isn't just about punishment, Madison replied thoughtfully. It's about acknowledgement, accountability, and prevention. Today's sentences acknowledge the harm that was done, hold the perpetrators accountable for their actions, and hopefully prevent similar harm in the future. What's next for you? Asked another reporter. Madison smiled. The same quiet confidence that had sustained her through months of legal proceedings and media attention. I'm finishing high school, applying to colleges, and continuing to work with organizations that support victims of bullying. My experience taught me that one person standing up can create ripple effects that transform entire systems. The transformation was already evident at Lincoln Valley High School. The new principal, Dr. Angela Foster, had implemented comprehensive anti-bullying programs, anonymous reporting systems, and restorative justice practices. Student surveys showed dramatic improvements in feelings of safety and belonging. Academic performance had actually improved, as students no longer spent energy navigating hostile social environments. Most tellingly, the school's culture had shifted from one that protected perpetrators to one that supported victims. Students who'd once been silent bystanders now actively intervened when they witnessed harassment. The social status that had once come from intimidating others was now associated with shameful behavior rather than admirable power. 3 years later, Madison Torres graduated as valedictorian of Lincoln Valley High School, delivering a commencement address that reflected on courage, justice, and the responsibility that comes with privilege and opportunity. Many of her classmates had been transformed by witnessing her stand against injustice, choosing to study social work, criminal justice, education, and other fields where they could work to protect vulnerable populations. Brittany Chen, Ashley Rodriguez, and Samantha Blake had completed their sentences and were attempting to rebuild their lives. Brittany was attending community college and working with anti-bullying organizations as part of her ongoing restitution requirements. Ashley had transferred to a different state and was reportedly doing well in therapy and academic programs. Samantha had become an advocate for mental health awareness, speaking about how peer pressure and social hierarchies had contributed to her harmful behavior. At her college graduation 4 years later, Madison was approached by a young woman who looked familiar but had changed so dramatically that recognition took a moment. "Madison? I don't know if you remember me. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I was a sophomore when everything happened at Lincoln Valley." Madison did remember. Jennifer had been one of the students who'd shared her story during the investigation, describing years of harassment that had made her consider suicide. "I wanted to thank you," Jennifer continued. "What you did, standing up the way you did, it saved my life. Literally. I was planning to kill myself the week after you got them arrested, because I couldn't imagine surviving 2 more years of their torture. But when I saw you fight back, when I saw them face real consequences, I realized that they weren't untouchable. It gave me hope that things could change." Jennifer was now a senior at a prestigious university, studying psychology with plans to become a therapist specializing in trauma recovery. Her transformation from a suicidal teenager to a confident young woman pursuing a career in healing others represented the broader changes that had rippled out from Madison's moment of defiance. "You don't need to thank me," Madison said warmly. "You found your own courage. I just showed you that fighting back was possible." "But that's everything," Jennifer replied. "Sometimes people just need to see that resistance is possible, that bullies aren't actually invincible, that institutions can be forced to change. You showed all of us that we didn't have to accept injustice as normal." As Madison completed her master's degree in social justice advocacy and began her career working with educational institutions to develop comprehensive anti-bullying policies, she often reflected on that October morning when her torn blazer had become a symbol of resistance rather than humiliation. The case had established legal precedents for prosecuting systematic bullying as conspiracy and civil rights violations. Educational institutions across the country had adopted policies inspired by the Lincoln Valley reforms. Thousands of students had found the courage to report harassment and seek support rather than suffering in silence. But perhaps most importantly, the incident had demonstrated that individual acts of courage could create systemic change when supported by communities willing to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and institutional failure. Years later, when Madison Torres spoke at conferences about bullying prevention and institutional reform, she would always return to the same central message that had guided her from that first moment of defiance through the long journey toward justice. "Bullies rely on your silence, your isolation, and your acceptance of their power as inevitable," she would tell audiences of students, educators, and policymakers. "But that power is actually fragile. It depends on communities that choose to look the other way, institutions that prioritize comfort over justice, and victims who believe they have no choice but to endure abuse. When you refuse to be silent, when you find allies, when you demand accountability, when you insist that institutions live up to their stated values rather than their convenient practices. Bullies discover that their power was always an illusion. Real power comes from courage, community, and the unwavering belief that every person deserves dignity and respect. The girl who'd been cornered in a hallway with scissors cutting her clothes had become a woman whose voice carried across auditoriums, whose story inspired legislation, and whose courage continued to create ripple effects years after that first moment of resistance. Madison Torres had learned that sometimes the most important battles begin when someone decides they've had enough of accepting the unacceptable. And sometimes, the quiet ones who just want to be left alone turn out to be the most dangerous opponents injustice ever faces. Because they fight not for glory or recognition, but for the simple, radical idea that everyone deserves to exist without fear, to learn without harassment, and to grow without having their spirits systematically destroyed by those who mistake cruelty for power. In the end, the bullies who thought they could destroy Madison Torres had instead created the catalyst for their own downfall and the transformation of everything they'd once controlled. Justice, it turned out, had a sense of irony that even they couldn't have anticipated. 10 years after the incident that changed everything at Lincoln Valley High School, Madison Torres received an unexpected letter in her Washington, D.C. office, where she worked as Director of Student Safety Policy for the Department of Education. The envelope bore no return address, just her name written in careful script that seemed oddly familiar. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message. "There's something you need to know about what really happened that day. Meet me at Riverside Park Saturday at 2 p.m. Come alone, someone who was there." Madison stared at the letter, her mind racing through possibilities. The Lincoln Valley case had been thoroughly investigated, documented, and resolved. What could possibly remain unknown after years of legal proceedings, media coverage, and academic analysis? Saturday afternoon found Madison sitting on a bench overlooking the river, watching families enjoy the crisp autumn weather. She'd almost decided the letter was a prank when she noticed a woman approaching hesitantly, glancing around nervously before making eye contact. "Madison Torres?" the woman asked, settling onto the opposite end of the bench while maintaining careful distance. Madison studied the stranger's face, noting something familiar in the bone structure despite the obvious attempts at disguise. Oversized sunglasses, a baseball cap pulled low, conservative clothing that seemed designed to blend into any crowd. "Do I know you?" Madison asked carefully. The woman removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that Madison recognized immediately despite the 10 years that had passed. "Hello, Madison. It's Brittany." Brittany Chen looked nothing like the polished queen bee who'd once ruled Lincoln Valley's social hierarchy. Her hair was pulled back simply, her clothes were practical rather than fashionable, and she carried herself with the careful posture of someone who'd learned to avoid attention rather than command it. "I know this is unexpected," Brittany continued quickly, apparently reading Madison's shocked expression. "I know you probably don't want to see me, and I understand if you want to leave right now. But there are things about that day, about everything that happened, that you deserve to know." Madison remained seated, her curiosity overcoming her initial impulse to walk away. "What kind of things?" Brittany took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "The truth about why we targeted you specifically. The truth about who was really behind the escalation. The truth about what's been happening to us since." Over the next hour, Brittany revealed a story that was both more complex and more disturbing than anything that had emerged during the original investigation. The systematic bullying at Lincoln Valley hadn't been the product of teenage cruelty alone, but had been encouraged and enabled by parents who saw intimidation as a valuable life skill and social dominance as preparation for future success. "My mother used to quiz me about who I'd put in their place each week," Brittany admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She called it leadership training. "My father said that learning to identify and neutralize threats early would serve me well in business and politics." The revelation that adult family members had actively encouraged their children's harmful behavior added a chilling dimension to the Lincoln Valley case. What had appeared to be adolescent cruelty had actually been systematic training in the abuse of power and privilege. "When you fought back, when you called the police, when everything started falling apart," Brittany continued, "our parents were furious, not because we'd hurt people, but because we'd been caught." Because their investment in our, quote, leadership development was being exposed as criminal behavior. Madison listened with growing unease as Brittany described the aftermath from the perpetrator's perspective. While public attention had focused on justice for victims and institutional reform, the families of the accused had been waging their own campaign of damage control and retaliation. Ashley's family moved to Switzerland after the sentencing, Brittany revealed. They bought her a new identity, essentially. She's living under a different name, attending university in Europe, with no digital footprint connecting her to what happened at Lincoln Valley. The escape route available to wealthy families was a stark reminder of how privilege could shield people from consequences even after criminal convictions. While victims continued dealing with trauma and rebuilding their lives, perpetrators with sufficient resources could simply purchase fresh starts in new locations. Samantha's story is different but equally troubling, Brittany continued. Her family had her committed to a private psychiatric facility immediately after sentencing, not for treatment, but for image management. They've spent the last decade claiming she was mentally ill during the bullying incidents, which absolves them of responsibility for enabling her behavior. The systematic effort to rewrite history and avoid accountability revealed the depth of institutional problems that extended far beyond individual schools or communities. Wealthy families were using mental health services, legal loopholes, and geographic mobility to escape consequences while maintaining their social and economic status. "And you?" Madison asked. "What happened to your family?" Brittany's laugh was bitter and humorless. "My parents disowned me when the criminal charges couldn't be made to disappear. Apparently, a daughter with a criminal record was worse for their reputation than having no daughter at all. I've been on my own since I turned 18, working minimum wage jobs and attending community college under my own name." The irony was inescapable. The child who had been most thoroughly abandoned by her privileged family was the only one facing genuine consequences and attempting real rehabilitation. "I'm not telling you this to gain sympathy," Brittany said quickly, apparently reading Madison's expression. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know that your victory wasn't as complete as it seemed. 2 of us escaped consequences entirely, and their families are still using wealth and influence to avoid accountability." Madison processed this information with the analytical skills she'd developed through years of policy work. The Lincoln Valley case had indeed created significant reforms and established important precedents, but it had also revealed the limits of justice when confronting systematic privilege and institutional protection. "There's something else," Brittany said, her voice dropping even lower. "The reason I reached out now, after all these years. Ashley's family has been quietly funding opposition to your policy work. They've been donating to organizations that fight anti-bullying legislation, supporting candidates who oppose school safety reforms, and spreading disinformation about the effectiveness of intervention programs." The revelation that Madison's current work was being actively undermined by families seeking revenge for their children's accountability was both shocking and sadly predictable. Wealth and influence that couldn't prevent criminal convictions could still be used to sabotage broader reform efforts. "How do you know this?" Madison asked. "Because they approached me," Brittany admitted. "Last year, when your department was pushing for federal anti-bullying standards, Ashley's father contacted me through intermediaries. He offered to pay my college tuition, cover my living expenses, and provide job placement after graduation if I would testify that you had somehow manufactured or exaggerated the evidence against us." Madison felt a chill as she realized the sophistication of the ongoing campaign against her work. "And?" "I told them to go to hell," Brittany said firmly. "Whatever I did wrong as a teenager, whatever damage I caused, I'm not going to compound it by lying to protect people who are still trying to harm others." The conversation continued as Brittany shared specific details about the financial networks and political connections being used to undermine student safety initiatives. Madison realized she was receiving intelligence about opposition research and sabotage efforts that could significantly impact her policy work. "Why are you telling me this?" Madison asked finally. "You could have just refused their offer and moved on with your life." Brittany was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the river where children were feeding ducks while their parents watched from nearby benches. "Because I finally understand what you were really fighting for that day in the hallway. It wasn't just about stopping us from cutting your clothes or humiliating you. It was about refusing to accept that some people get to hurt others without consequences." She turned to face Madison directly. I spent years in therapy trying to understand how I became someone who could torture other human beings for entertainment. The answer was that I was raised to believe that power existed to be used against people weaker than me. That causing suffering was just smart strategy. That empathy was weakness. Madison listened as Brittany described a decade of unlearning toxic lessons about hierarchy, dominance, and the acceptable treatment of other human beings. The process had been painful, expensive, and often lonely, but it had produced someone fundamentally different from the teenager who'd wielded scissors in a high school hallway. "I can't undo what I did," Brittany concluded. "I can't give back the years of therapy my victims needed, or restore the academic opportunities they lost, or repair the damage to their sense of safety and self-worth. But I can make sure that the people who created me don't get to create more victims." Madison studied Brittany's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What she saw instead was someone who genuinely grappled with the harm she'd caused and was attempting to make amends through meaningful action rather than empty gestures. "If you're serious about this," Madison said carefully, "there are ways you could help that go beyond just sharing information." Over the next hour, they discussed possibilities for Brittany to contribute to anti-bullying efforts through her unique perspective as a former perpetrator who'd undergone genuine rehabilitation. Her insights into the family dynamics and social structures that created abusive behavior could be invaluable for prevention programs. "I've been thinking about this for months," Brittany admitted. "I want to find ways to warn parents about the long-term consequences of teaching children that cruelty is strength. Most families won't listen to lectures from experts, but they might pay attention to someone who lived through the complete destruction of a life built on those principles." As the afternoon progressed, Madison found herself having a conversation she never could have imagined. The person who'd once represented everything wrong with privilege and power was now offering to become an ally in fighting the systems that had created her harmful behavior. "This doesn't erase what happened," Madison said clearly. "It doesn't absolve you of responsibility or somehow make us friends. But if you're genuinely committed to preventing others from causing the same harm, then yes, there might be ways to work together." They exchanged contact information and agreed to explore collaboration possibilities through proper channels, with oversight and accountability measures. Madison would need time to verify Brittany's claims about ongoing opposition efforts, and to consult with victim advocacy groups about the appropriateness of including former perpetrators in prevention work. As they prepared to leave, Brittany hesitated, as if debating whether to share one more piece of information. "There's one last thing," she said finally. "Something I never told anyone during the investigation or the trial. The morning we attacked you, it wasn't random or spontaneous. We'd been planning it for weeks, waiting for the right moment when enough people would be watching to maximize your humiliation." Madison felt the familiar surge of anger that accompanied reminders of how calculated and deliberate their cruelty had been. "But here's what I want you to know," Brittany continued. "In all our planning, in all our discussions about how to break you down and drive you out, we never once considered the possibility that you might fight back. We never imagined that our victim might refuse to be victimized." She paused, seeming to gather courage for her final words. "That oversight, that complete inability to imagine resistance from someone we saw as powerless, that was our fundamental weakness. And your refusal to accept powerlessness was what destroyed everything we'd built our identities around." 10 years later, Madison Torres had become one of the nation's leading advocates for comprehensive anti-bullying policies and institutional accountability. Her work had influenced legislation in dozens of states and helped establish federal guidelines for school safety programs. The Lincoln Valley case remained a landmark example of how individual courage could create systemic change. But the conversation with Brittany Chen had revealed that the battle was far from over. Wealth and privilege continued to shield perpetrators from consequences, while funding efforts to undermine the very reforms designed to protect future victims. As Madison returned to her office Monday morning, she carried with her both sobering intelligence about ongoing opposition efforts and unexpected hope about the possibility of redemption and alliance building across former battle lines. The quiet transfer student who just wanted to attend school in peace had become a national voice for justice and institutional reform. But perhaps most importantly, she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful victories came not from defeating enemies, but from helping them understand why they needed to choose a different side. The girl whose torn blazer had sparked a revolution was now a woman whose continued work ensured that future students would never have to choose between accepting abuse and risking everything to fight back. Because Madison Torres had proven that one person's refusal to accept injustice could indeed change the world, one school, one policy, and one conversation at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.